11:04, so we're going to go ahead and get started with everybody that we have on the phone today. My name is Ian Cartwright. I'm with Creative Breakthroughs. We're an IT security consulting company and a Palo Alto Networks partner. We basically have two main practice areas. So we have advisory services, which is everything from policy to application assessments to penetration testing, things like that. And then we also have the value-added reseller with an emphasis on value-added. We partner with about 10 or 15 strategic best-of-breed companies that make hardware and software for IT security, and we perform professional services, integration, installation, health checking, those kinds of things for that. And Palo Alto Networks is one of our strategic partners. We do a lot of services around Palo Alto Networks, whether it comes to installing new ones or replacing old ones or upgrading them, or just helping to integrate them into your IT security world and business processes. Today, I've got John Dutch, who is an SE manager with Palo Alto Networks, to give us the next generation network security overview here, and I'll let you take it from here, John.
Yeah, thanks, Ian, and welcome everyone to our discussion. We call it Expose the Underground, and really what we want to do today was talk a little bit about some of the market dynamics and some of the recent security threats that really affect a lot of businesses. Certainly seen a lot of change in those dynamics over the years. I've been involved in IT security for the last 20 years and certainly seen some pretty dramatic shifts in the types of threats, the types of attacks, and to see those evolve over time is very interesting. We're going to talk a little bit about the kill chain. I think that there's a very good opportunity right now to look at what are our current architectures, what are the technologies that we're using, and finally, what are the policies that we put in place to defeat some of these threats that are out there today. And then finally, we're going to kind of wrap up with what we think are some of the core platform values that you should keep in mind when evaluating or deciding some of your technology decisions. So with that, if you're not familiar with Palo Alto Networks, founded in 2005, started shipping products in 2007, seen tremendous amount of growth. We're currently adding over 1,000 customers per quarter. From a security perspective, and what we're going to focus on is we have 2,500 Wildfire customers. Wildfire is our solution for malware. This discussion today is going to really focus on malware. The reason I bring that up is because we certainly analyze a lot of malware, and we research, what are the behaviors of this malware, and how do we provide the protections against that? So I thought we would start today is to really talk about some of the behaviors of malware. Why do we see an increase in this modern malware? What are the industries? And then we'll talk about maybe some strategies that we can put in place to provide some protections. So, I think this is a standard vendor slide that you see from everybody, but the fact is very relevant. The dynamics of our network are changing rapidly. We've seen the rise in mobile technology, smartphones, BYOD challenges. Basically we have users moving off of the network, and this presents a lot of security concerns for our organization because devices are not within our corporate perimeter. There is the exposure level for those devices to be compromised for malware to be installed, and subsequently those users come back to our network and can infect servers and resources and certainly present a threat to the data within our corporation. From an application perspective, certainly a big rise in software as a service. So you have companies like Workday, Concur, ServiceNow, that are Office 365 that are, hosting these applications in the cloud. And so what does that mean from a security perspective? What does that mean for how our data is moved around, not contained within our network so much, but also contained within the cloud? And then we see servers moving off the network, right? And so you have infrastructure as a service, solutions from AWS, Amazon, and others. Google's in the mix, Microsoft, and even Cisco has announced, that direction of providing these services. And I think what drives a lot of these conversations is the desire to reduce costs within an organization, right? So, if we can do this cheaper in the cloud, then that is very attractive. Presents a lot of challenges from a security perspective, and as we have to ensure compliance, how do we ensure that we don't have critical data going across and being hosted in the cloud where there's some limited capabilities, I think, to provide that level of security. Certainly, limited visibility to see what's going on from a threat perspective. So, I think that one thing that we've seen over time is companies have looked to, they've analyzed the threat and they said, okay, well, we need to procure some technology to provide that protection against that threat. And subsequently, we're dealing with, most companies that we talk to today are dealing with this idea of their technology sprawl, where, instead of security device being one firewall, it typically is going to contain an IPS, some sort of network AV. We may be doing DLP, SIEM, and we've seen some solutions that have tried to unify this and package all of these different technologies into a single box. And we'll talk about what are the advantages of that. Just from a high level, our perspective is, UTMs provide very little value other than providing those technologies on a consolidated platform. There really isn't a lot of integration between those different technologies. And that's really, I think, the theme of this presentation is really, what is the value of integrating different security technologies under a single infrastructure? So, I guess the point is that, so all of these organizations have invested tens of thousands, millions of dollars into technology, and are we any better off? We continue to see companies make headlines, whether that's Target, Home Depot recently, this week. It seems that every week there is a new company that is making the headlines regarding a data breach where we're losing credit card information, social security numbers, maybe their personal pictures, whatever the case is. But, it's very prevalent that the attackers that represent the threats are able to get what they want. So we really have to ask the question of, is all of this investment, has it been worthwhile? Do we have the right architectures in place? Do we have the right technology? And finally, do we have the right policy? So that's what we'll talk about. So, we like to talk about, this new threat landscape. I think everybody has seen this, and, it's certainly talked about everywhere. What I really want to do is talk about what it means to be secure in the cyber world as opposed to what it means to be insecure. So if we understand the problem, what's the solution, and what do we have today, and what do we need to get there tomorrow? So that's what we'll talk about. So, the first thing is this idea of the cyber attack kill chain. And if we look at what is the methodology of an attacker, they really follow these 5 steps. And it presents, if we look at the problem in this context, it really gives us, I think, a little clearer picture in terms of what we need to do from a technology perspective. The good news is that when we start to map technology to the individual steps in the kill chain, it really gives us an unfair advantage. And the reason is that the attackers, when they want to put a piece of malware, if they want to steal data from us, they have to be successful in each of these steps. The good news is that we only have to be successful in one of these steps. So if we can stop, let's say, the exploit phase, or we can stop the delivery of malware, then we kill the entire process. So that's why this is important in looking at it this way, so that we can, get that unfair advantage. Okay, so, what has changed from a behavioral standpoint? We see today's cyber attackers, certainly using some very sophisticated evasion tactics. If we look at, the effectiveness of our traditional approaches, whether those are antivirus, even IPS in some ways, we see the value of those technologies decreasing over time. We have typically implemented techniques that, have tried to detect these, tried to prevent them, but in the end is really leaving the enterprises prone to risk. And I think the third point on this is very, very important. We see the volume of attacks is rapidly accelerating. When we look at where these attacks are coming from, whether we think that they're coming from Russia or China, all of the typical places, these organizations, these underground organizations of attackers, they operate with, seemingly impunity. There's very little legal recourse, and quite frankly, they just don't feel that exposed. And so, they certainly broadcast their attacks out there fairly rapidly. If you have any type of sensors set up, most organizations are getting attacked on a daily basis. What we really have to do is find out, which of those attacks are being successful, which of those attacks really present a big risk to the organization. What we've seen is that the first 24 hours are really critical within an organization. Within the first 24 hours is when the majority of infections occur. So there's a lot of malware writers that are, morphing malware so that they can be zero-day malware and seemingly go undetected and infect the organization very quickly. If you look at, from a percentage standpoint, 95% of the infections are occurring within the first 24 hours, with only 5% occurring after that. So when we look at making an architectural or technology decision, we really have to think about this time frame and how do we provide these protections within a 24-hour period, and the sooner the better, right? So if we can we bring that down to an hour? Can we bring that down to a half hour, 15 minutes? So, I think that it's kind of interesting we work with a lot of different companies across a wide range of industries, and it's kind of interesting to me to see what is the security posture of different organizations. Sometimes we have organizations that say, security isn't, that important. Cost is more important. We're not too concerned about an attack. Others are very, very concerned. So I think it's kind of interesting to see, what is the security posture of a lot of these organizations. I think that, due to some of these high-profile attacks, we're certainly seeing the amount of security awareness increase, which is really promising. So there's a company called the Enterprise Security Group, and I think we have a copy of this report available on our website. But just a few data points from this report. So 59% of the organizations that they interviewed had already identified that there was a successful malware attack on their network. About half of them admitted that it took their organizations days, weeks, months, to understand the exposure, understand the scope of what was compromised by that malware. And consequently, we're seeing new budgets allocated to, preventing these types of attacks. And in fact, 40% of the organizations are creating a dedicated information security group. And by talking about a dedicated information security group, I'm talking more, I think extending beyond that traditional scope of defining policy and really looking at how do I have an information security group that understands malware, does some intelligence around understanding if they're being targeted for attack, doing analysis and investigations and forensics on malware. So, certainly seeing a shift, I think, from an organizational perspective in understanding the importance of malware and the threat that represents. So, others still in denial. Not quite sure why there's a white box over the top one. That top one is retail, by the way. Retail has typically been a challenge, I think, from a cost perspective. They run typically pretty lean in their organizations. They have thousands of locations, and the ability to put real strong controls in each of those locations has been a challenge for them. The exposure is great, right? So you have credit card information, which is kind of the holy grail right now. There's a lot of websites that sell, very recent credit card data, and that has been kind of the target of choice recently with a lot of the high-profile attacks. But certainly there's a lot of industries, and I think it's kind of interesting just to break down of which organizations put a big importance on security and where are the threats going to. By the way, the legend isn't on here as well, so sorry about that. But these are, the green is talking about the number of incidences in each of those different organizational verticals. Okay, so we talk about this a lot, and that's really around the effectiveness of this legacy security infrastructure. So we certainly see a lot of customers that are, certainly still dealing with siloed security, meaning the networking group may deal with the firewalls. You may have a dedicated security group that's dealing with IPS and DLP. They each kind of run their own technologies, and there's not a lot of conversations across those different technology areas, and I think that's part of the problem, right? So if we identify that there's a risk, or we see some malicious behavior or malicious traffic, and that's discovered by one of our technologies, how do we enforce that using some of the other technologies? And so I think that's why we see, all of these headlines, is because the effectiveness of these, legacy security solutions is actually decreasing over time. Meanwhile, we have, the volume of the attacks, the complexity, and the tools that are available to these attackers, increasing. So we're really kind of at this turning point where we have to decide, the way that we've always done this, is that still the right approach? Do we need to look at, a different architecture? Do we need to look at different technology to increase our overall security effectiveness? So, I think modern malware is definitely turned into this compelling event. So, we understand that malware presents that big risk. The other thing that's interesting about malware is that this traditional AV solution, which every organization is implemented, it's become less and less effective. And in fact, Symantec was on record, and I don't remember exactly where I saw this, but they are on record as saying that antivirus is not effective in dealing with the malware threat that's out there. So kind of interesting to have an AV vendor talk about, how ineffective their technology is at stopping some of the modern threats that are out there. So the big question is where do we go from here? And let's talk about the kill chain a little bit. So I think that the first thing that we have to do is we have to separate known attacks versus unknown attacks. So a known attack is simply a piece of malicious code or malware that's been seen by the security systems before, whether that's been in your organization or maybe you're getting some type of feed that is giving you some intelligence about malware that's been seen in the wild within another organization's environment, but you now have some sort of hash or some way to identify that. It could also mean that that malware has an antivirus signature. I guess what typifies, the known attacks is that it's easy to spot these attack methods, right? So if we, contrast that to unknown attacks, these are typically zero-day attacks, probably a piece of custom-crafted malware that has never been seen by antivirus and in some of these traditional security approaches. Unknown attacks for 0 days are very easy to compromise networks. So, we really want to look at how do we provide these protections. I think focusing on the unknown attacks and how do we prevent those. So if we look at, and this is from our studies, right? So, Wildfire is analyzing files every day that according to the policy that's defined on the firewall, and setting up the Wildfire cloud. We also offer, a localized solution if you don't want to send files up to the cloud. But what we found is that 54% of the files that we analyze that are malware are not covered by traditional AV at the time of detection. And in fact, if you go out 7 days, that number is still 40%. So antivirus has not been a very good technology to really, even within 7 days to identify it as malware and provide the update and the protections to protect against that malware. 7 days, in today's world is simply too long. So kind of going back to this kill chain, and we look at, how do people compromise how do people compromise the network or an organization? They're typically going to bait the end user. They're going to do some sort of phishing campaign and try to get them to click on a link, install some piece of software. They're going to exploit, and what we've seen is really they used to have the exploit as well as the malware itself. So there's really two components of an attack. It's how do I exploit that endpoint? How do I take advantage of some software weakness in some program, whether that's Microsoft Office, maybe that's Adobe Reader, maybe that's Java, JavaScript. There's some way to, and there's also a way to exploit the operating systems themselves. How do I inject processes into known DLLs, things like that. So there's the exploit itself, and then there's this idea of a secondary payload, and that's the malware itself. It's responsible for, setting up command and control channels, and it's responsible for ultimately exfiltrating the data. So, the two pieces being exploit and then the actual backdoor. We've also seen a very big shift in that malware tries to move laterally within the organization. So if they've exploited an endpoint, they're trying to get away from that endpoint as quickly as possible and install other pieces of that malware on other servers and endpoints within that organization. They can then set up a bot network and communicate within that bot network to discover additional resources within that network and ultimately exfiltrate data. So what we advocate is to really look at technologies and architectures to break these weaknesses at all points in the kill chain. And the real question here is what do you do? Do you look at a best of breed approach where you say, I am going to look for the leaders in the market in each of these different phases? Do I look at disparate solutions, or do I choose the integrated approach? So let's look at Target as an example, because I think that this really illustrates that point. And I'm not going to go into the attack itself, but we know that Target was compromised by one of their partners, one of their vendors. It was actually a company that does monitoring. It does the refrigeration units in the stores. So they had a network connection into Target to do some of the refrigeration monitoring. That company was actually compromised, and then they were able to go into and get access into Target and ultimately into their point of sale systems and ultimately the credit card information. So what's interesting to me about the Target attack was that this was not a sophisticated attack. It was using known pieces of malware that's been known for quite a while. They did things in a very standard way and it's a very simple way. And the real question is could Target have done something differently to block this attack? So we know that Target had implemented FireEye. They actually had identified this malware. They didn't implement FireEye in an inline mode, so they weren't actively blocking it. It was run by the security team. The security team was looking for malicious behaviors on the network. They said, yes, we have identified that, but they didn't have a way to block it. So that's just one part of that. I think there's a couple other interesting things that Target could have done. So the first thing is this idea of segmentation. And, we really advocate towards this model of zero trust, which basically says that we need to segment our network into certain zones. And the good part about that segmentation is that we should know the applications that are running on those segments. So if we say that we are going to have, in Target's case, are we going to have a point of sale system? We should know exactly what applications use those point of sale systems, and we should not allow everything else to access that, right? We should deny everything else. And you can further strengthen the security policy by, you could say, we could limit the amount of users, we can limit the amount of applications, we can do a lot of things. We can eliminate some of the content. So maybe we don't want to allow file attachments to be sent. We would not expect file attachments to be on our point of sale segment, and we're going to block all file attachments within that segment. But I think as organizations evolve, we're going to see more and more segmentation. Certainly, the users present probably the biggest risk. The users should be on their own segment. And if the user segment is accessing anything else, we should do, some pretty deep inspection and know exactly what they're accessing and how they're accessing it. I think in Target's case, if they would have segmented off their vendor or their refrigeration vendor into its own segment and really not allowed them access from a straight firewall perspective, they could have easily prevented the attack that happened to them. So without spending any money, they could have strengthened their security. certainly understanding malware and all of those things would also be helpful in providing some active protections from that. Okay, so the second point is blocking all known threats. So, you know, things like the vulnerability exploits, malware. Once the malware is active, it's probably going to do a port 80 call or an SSL call out to a particular URL. You can implement URL. There's known malware categories within URL filtering. Those are updated dynamically very quickly. And in fact, you can also look for DNS queries. So, you know, the idea of having fast flux domains, and from a DNS perspective, we can also identify if there's some malware activity on the network. And then certainly understanding and identifying whether there's command and control activity on the network. I think that these are low-hanging fruit, meaning if you talk to anybody, it's very easy to put in a policy that says we need to block all known threats. It's interesting how many organizations do not do this today. But again, it's low-hanging fruit and something that we should all be doing. And then identifying and blocking unknown threats. So, you know, whatever your malware solution, we have Wildfire, but there's FireEye, there's, you know, several solutions that are out there. But we need to make sure that we have a solution, one, to identify zero-day or unknown threats, and then also we have a way to systematically implement an active protection against a zero-day malware. And instead of moving from this this idea of, you know, we are going to identify it, we're going to, you know, then we'll analyze it, try to do some forensics. We really need to provide that protection in real time into the network and do that analysis later. But again, malware, if we identify it as malware, it should be low-hanging fruit. It's a threat to the network. It's a threat to our resources, and we should be very easy to define a policy to provide those active protections against it. So, you know, what we really talk about is, you know, and what Palo Alto does, and I think the value that we have, and I think you will see that the market is generally going this way. So we've had Wildfire technology for the last 3 years. And the interesting thing about Wildfire is once we understand the behaviors of particular malware, we can then feed that intelligence into other technologies within the firewall. So let me give you an example. So if I know that a piece of malware is using a particular command and control language, Wildfire will automatically create a signature. We use our IPS engine to identify network patterns that would indicate a particular command and control language. If we see that in Wildfire through our analysis, we can create an IPS signature for that new command and control communication and feed that into our IPS engine. Our IPS engine then utilizes its enforcement capabilities to stop and block that traffic. That is one example. We can utilize our full complement of capabilities. So on the left-hand side, you see that we have App ID, which is kind of that core component of our security philosophy. That's, you know, identifying applications and then defining a security policy based on that particular application. But we also have URL filtering, IPS, anti-spyware, AV, file blocking, unknown threats as Wildfire. So within this system itself, and if we map that back to the kill chain, you can see that within the Palo Alto firewall, we can provide protections for every step within that kill chain. Ultimately, we want to turn the unknowns into knowns. And if we can do that very, very quickly, that is the best methodology to increasing our overall security. So, I wanted to kind of present the same information in a different way. And if I look at what I tried to do here was kind of give you, a meter of the effectiveness of these different technologies, different parts of the kill chain, as a standalone. And, if we look at, sandboxing, so we see that segmentation, if we have standalone, segmentation is a very good architectural approach to increasing our overall security. But we see that anti-malware sandboxing by itself isn't that effective. So it's great, we can detect that there is malware, but unless we're providing some active prevention, it's not really that effective of a technology. And we can see that URL filtering and IPS, all of these technologies, it's a reactive approach. So if we're trying to prevent, we can only prevent known things when it's a standalone solution. So, we advocate, and from a technology perspective, we provide the integrated approach. And really, it's more than the sum of its parts, right? So, if we can understand malicious behavior and then write those different signatures for the other technologies, the value of the solution has grown exponentially. So, basically what I think the focus of a lot of security organizations right now is, how do we discover these unknown threats? Just give you some quick statistics on what we're seeing from our Wildfire solution. So right now we have 2,500 Wildfire customers around the globe. These are essentially become our sensor network, right? So we can see different organizations, different financial or different verticals getting hit with different data, and then we can do that analysis and send all of that intelligence to, we have about 15,000 Palo Alto customers. So from our different customers that are running Wildfire, we can send all of that information to all of our customers. Just some quick updates: 370,000 unknown files that are processed per day by Wildfire. This is one advantage of doing this in the cloud, is because we can scale dynamically within the cloud. If you're running a standalone solution, that's something that needs to be managed. You have to look at how many files are being analyzed in a given hour or a given period of time. Kind of manage that process. One advantage of the cloud is that it can scale dynamically. Both solutions work, and I understand some privacy concerns and the need to do an on-prem solution, and that's why we provide that there. So here's that sort of same graph of the kill chain, and we see that the overall effectiveness of having an integrated solution, right? It makes all of these other technologies more useful, right? So we see an increase in our URL filtering effectiveness, IPS, anti-malware, sandboxing. All of those solutions are much more valuable as we integrate those together on a single platform. So, I think, we often, and, I'm on the engineering side, so I always talk about, from a technology perspective or an architecture perspective, the advantages of integrating these technologies together. I want to point out that there's also, other advantages. I think from a cost savings, the more that you can integrate this, you can certainly reduce the capital expenditures, but I think probably even more important than the capital expenditures, that operational expenditures or OpEx. certainly, dealing with different vendors and understanding the integration points between different vendors and getting that all to work with different versions of code and code upgrades becomes a big challenge. Operationally, having an integrated solution from a single vendor is easier to operate. So just a quick update on some of our core platform values. I think, one of the questions that we get a lot is, John, that's great. You advocate towards an integrated platform solution. I'm very concerned about what that's going to do from a performance standpoint. And when we developed when we first started the company, it's one of the design goals that we had right from the beginning was how do we enable all of these different technologies. And by the way, if you look at the performance of the UTM, those are separate scanning processes because they've taken separate solutions, they've integrated it onto a single piece of hardware, but fundamentally the code is the same. So if I run a firewall and I scan it against the security policy on the firewall, then I have to hand it over to the IPS. It also scans it. Now I've added application identification into the mix, and I have to scan it to determine what kind of application it is. All of these different scanning functions presents a performance problem. And what you see performance degradation, pretty significant performance degradation on a UTM style solution. What we did was we developed what we call our single pass software and our parallel processing hardware. Basically, from within a single pass, so that packet comes into the firewall, we can analyze it against the IPS signatures. We can analyze it once against all of those different signatures. We actually unify the different signatures, whether those are URL, IPS, AG, Wildfire, no malware. All of those signatures are unified into a single database. So we scan those once, and we can identify that packet or packets as being good or bad based on that. What that allows us to do is to really get very good performance and really predictable performance. So if you look at our performance sheets, I think we're probably one of the only vendors that really lives up to the performance metrics that we have in our data sheets. And what that allows you to do is really, you don't have to compromise and say, well, I really want to add IPS or I really want to add this Wildfire capability, but I don't know what it's going to do to my network. So we view that as a compromise, and we want you to be able to enable all of the security functions and have a really predictable level of performance. And I think that you'll see that that's where the industry goes, and the other vendors will start to allow those as well. Sort of the core functions of what we do is in the three tenets is really about moving away from the concept and security of IP addresses, ports, and protocols, and really looking at three fundamental things. The first is the application identification. That is, how do I identify the application, write a security policy on it. Secondly is bringing in a user ID context. We can transparently acquire user ID information and use that as a basis to make security decisions within the firewall. If we do not want to use user ID information to make security decisions, it can be very, very helpful from a logging perspective. And we see a lot of our organizations that are using our technology utilize the user ID function just from a logging perspective. And this provides a lot of value. So if we see that there's command and control language coming from an IP address, yeah, it's not that interesting. If I can say that, that was John Dutch over in, SE land that is now compromised with a piece. Now that's very interesting because I can quickly, call him and say, you have a piece of malware, we need to get your laptop in and analyze that. And then finally is content ID, and that is, within that application traffic, what is it doing, and do I want to provide some specialized protections, whether that's doing some web filtering with URLs. Maybe I want to filter the data and look for, viruses, spyware, exploits within the within file attachments, those kinds of things. So the way that this works is it allows you to really, if we think about, moving away from IP addresses and applications, it makes it really easy to take a business policy that says, I want marketing group to be able to access Facebook. I want them to be able to do all the things that they need to do. It makes it easy to translate a business policy into a security policy. We see a lot of organizations that say, we don't want to take that strict of an approach, but, we do care about a few things. And if I look at my finance group or my HR group, we certainly want them to have more protections against their data, against their traffic, versus our general user population. So, I don't advocate personally as using technology to be the productivity police, but the fact is that, if I have a finance person that I see a Tor connection from, that's concerning to me from a security perspective. And those are the types of capabilities where if I am identifying the application, I see that a user from finances has a Tor connection, or maybe I have a software developer that is using Tor, that is very concerning to me. And that's how we can, that is the value that Palo Alto brings, is in identifying those applications and being able to write security policies around those applications. So a little bit of a commercial there. We'll get right to the summary here. So, we talked a lot about this evolution of network security, trying to limit, these islands of technology and really move towards an integrated approach. I think that, we first have to recognize it's a new threat landscape, this new motivation, financials. The threat is bigger, it's more real than it ever has been due to the pervasiveness of the tools, the actors that are involved, and ultimately we really need a couple things, I think, is the, one is, I think the low-hanging fruit of this idea of network segmentation is an easy one. I think we need to look, organizations need to look at, how do I segment that network? How do I, either define some very important networks that I want to really limit access to, or the other approach is, I want to segment off my users and we know that the user land is, represents a big threat to our network, so let's segment them off. The more segmentation, the better, in my mind. Then from a technology perspective, do we look to an integrated approach in assessing, if we have a malware solution today, or we have an AV solution, or we have a URL filtering solution, how does that integrate into the rest of the environment? Can I increase my overall security by integrating some of these functions? And then finally, from a policy perspective, right, are there things that I can tighten up on the policy, whether it's this example of the finance users, the HR users, are there areas in my business that we can easily say that we need more security and focus on that. And then finally, it's focusing on breaking the kill chain, right? Making sure that from a coverage standpoint, we have solutions in each of those areas of the kill chain to prevent the attack. So very happy to answer any questions, comments on the webcast.
think everybody's still muted. Let's unmute everybody. Nope, I'm not seeing anything. So if nobody else has anything, like I said, you can, if you do have a question, you can give us an email or a call at CBI, and we'll be happy to answer it for you or get you in touch with the right people. Other than that, I wanted to thank John for taking us through all that today, and thank all of you for taking time out of your day to attend. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.